episode 4 of Songs from a Padded Envelope. My name is Steve, and I'm here with co-host Ben. Hello, Ben.
Hey there, Steve.
So this episode features a conversation with Paul Preston Mills, who joined us to talk about his band Nugget. So I've known Paul for over 30 years, and we performed and made music together, and his is one of those enduring friendships where it doesn't matter how long it's been since you last spoke, or you just sort of pick up where you left off. Ben, do you remember when you first met Paul?
God, I don't know if I do. I'm wondering whether the first instance of meeting Paul would have been at Euston at Rails, possibly at the from the Heads Game show. I think that might have been the first experience of seeing him. I don't know if I got to talk to him that night. Does that you think that might be the right time?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah. Almost certainly, because Paul and I were in a band together and we played at the Rails Club in Euston. And I think because you'd helped to sort that show out, because you'd played there previously with Green Mivy. Is that the band that you're in? Yeah.
I think it was.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's an episode in itself, right there.
It is indeed, mate. Yeah.
But so it probably was. And then Paul would just turn up in London unannounced on a Friday evening. He'd arrive having driven on his motorbike from Lowestoft with an overnight bag stuffed with all that he needed for the weekend, and and then we would have a weekend. But the thing is, despite sort of being friends for so long, doing an actual interview was a real sort of treat and a really good way of hearing a different perspective on his life. Did you expect the conversation to go the way that it did?
I expected some of the conversation to go the way it did, Steve. Yeah, kind of. I mean, I haven't known Paul as long as you, but many, many varied and significant memories of nights and time spent with him. Always entertaining, always full of stories and lots of reflection afterwards and lots of laughter. So we got that in spade loads, didn't we? But there was also a completely different side of Paul that came across in significant moments. I think people are in for a real treat today. They're going to get some fantastic stories that are going to have people falling off their chair with bellyfuls of laughter. But I think we really urge people to listen a little bit deeper than that, because you're going to find some, completely different side expressed. You're going to hear someone absolutely nail the essence and importance of narrative and storytelling, and then also kind of talk about a real pivotal moment in their life about making a commitment to creativity and everything that kind of proceeded and led on from there. Yeah, so I think some of what I expected and a lot of what I didn't. What about for you?
Yeah, I agree. But it was nice it's an unusual situation to find yourself in, speaking to such a friend of such a long time and interviewing them about their life, aspects of which you know about, but it's not a context in which you sort of speak to your friends, especially people that you've known for so long. So it was really interesting to do that, and then for him to be so engaging all the way through, and sort of generous with his stories and the honesty, especially around some of the sort of key decisions that he's made in his life. We could easily have another episode with Paul, or two or three, and hear stories. His trip to South America, with a sort of traveling circus show around South America that took him all over the place for months, is an epic tale. We didn't even discuss that. I loved it. I loved speaking with him, and well, the thing is, his interview came about because he's just recently unearthed these Nugget recordings. So as well as him being such a fantastic storyteller and so funny, the band also featured Justin and Dan Hawkins, who went on to form The Darkness. So it's a little rock and roll curio too.
Oh, it's perfect, isn't it? It's great. Yeah.
Yeah. It's lovely that he's the custodian of that now. But so now you've heard those Lung Nugget songs. Are you hoping for a reunion show?
I would absolutely kill for a reunion. I think it would be phenomenal. I think that's well, when people come to listen to the recording at the end of the episode, it's a proper raw, full rock and roll experience that captures them in the moment, isn't it?
It is.
It would be, yeah. It's a lovely thing. Did you ever see Lung Nugget? I'm not sure if we've decided you had seen them or not.
I don't think I did. I don't think so. I don't have a memory of seeing them, but I remember hearing those songs for the first time, and in particular, "Satan's in My Phone Box," which is the song that features at the end of this episode. It became quite a cult hit in the Lowestoft music scene.
Yeah, just thinking a little bit more on reflecting on the interview afterwards immediately, and in particular about, we know that Paul's undertaken a whole myriad of kind of creative kind of routes in his life, done, hundreds of different things. And when he talked about the moment in which he decided to make that commitment, it really brought back to my mind the conversation that you and I had when we were talking with Jarbo from the the New York no wave band Swans, and she was talking about a kind of a similar epiphany, a sort of moment where she looked at what her life was like at that moment, felt that everything was mapped out, and was deeply unhappy about it. And she described how she decided that she was gonna dive without a net, and it led to what she described as being an extremely difficult way of life, but one that she totally didn't regret. And she urged people to make that commitment, to not be afraid, and to make a decision to live a life based around creativity and not regret those decisions.
And being absolutely true to yourself.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the things that we've started to, that we hoped we would unearth in this podcast, as well as finding, the experience of people who made demos and have unearthed them, was what is it that drives people's creativity? What is it that makes them want to make things?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that. I think that's spot on, mate. Okay, so let's go over to our interview with Paul Preston Mills from Lung Nugget.
I'm Paul Preston Mills. Hello, good evening, podcast audience of the world, or indeed good morning if that's your preferred time. I'm one of the co-conspirators in a band named as Lung Nugget, formed in the early 90s. And the song you'll be listening to is our opus, Satan's in My Phone Box.
And it is a beautiful, beautiful piece of music, which I think a lot of people will find relaxing and edifying at the end of this episode.
I think, like all great music, it veers between unlistenable and beauty.
Fantastic.
I think that was the particular furrow you were ploughing in Lung Nugget, I think.
Pretty much, yeah. It was basically, thumbing our noses at everything we could get away with.
So I think before we go any further, it's probably worth mentioning that we are very familiar with one another, the three of us. We are familiar
almost
with
biblically.
each other.
I had to run into a hedge at your wedding and put petrol into a generator in order that the ceremony could take place, as I recall.
Oh,
you absolutely did save the day. Yes, you did. In the rain. In the rain. I remember you emerging victorious from a copse of trees in your tank top.
Reeking of petrol and success.
just another normal day for you, really, mate.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So Lung Nugget. Now, I'd encourage people to wait and not skip to the end. Although, the promise of a song called "Satan's in My Phone Box" is obviously going to be too tantalising for some people, and they may just skip the conversation and go straight to the listening to the song. But for those people that don't do that, this recording is obviously not a polished studio demo. Could you just go through how you recorded the song and what you were intending to do with the recordings?
We were recording the songs because at some point in the future we knew there'd be a technology whereby people would want to talk about old shit that people had done and then play it to other people on the internet. So we thought we'd better record them. And it was recorded, I don't actually remember how. I think it was recorded on Commercial Road in Lowestoft, in a building that I can't remember the name of, and Steve might be able to remember the name of, which was like a youth club come rehearsal space. It's near the Seabreeze Club, if you're down that way, where my friend Darren was glassed quite brutally about 10 years later. He was survived, though, don't worry. And it was just, I think we just put it on whichever cassette player someone had brought with them. And it's just a recording of the band going through the song in the space quite feistily. I think feisty is the word I'd use. It's quite a feisty capture of that particular song.
You sent us a whole bunch of tracks over, Paul. Were they all recorded at the same time in the same sort of fashion?
Yes. I think they were recorded all at exactly the same time. And the guy that had them, so I think he probably recorded them, was our bass player, who for many years was known solely by the moniker of Med. So I think he recorded them, and he was our bass player at the time. We did have another bass player who's currently living in America called Skeets. Oh, actually, no, we had three bass players because the original bass player was a chap called James Lear. But I can't remember why he left. I think he just didn't like playing bass for us.
So, Paul, tell us a little bit about how the band came together initially.
Well, the band, the core of the band, the kind of the engine room of the band's creativity was myself and a fellow by the name of Justin Hawkins, also of Lowestoft, who went on to do some other musical things. And we first met, I think, in a rehearsal space, maybe even in passing, and got chatting. And then I think we were at a gig at a place called Forbes Brewery in Alton Broad, which is close to Lowestoft. And we decided at that moment we were going to form a band, probably a duo at that point. So we decided to get a gig as we decided to form a band. So we bullshitted the manager of the bar that we were going to do 4 sets on the Saturday fortnight following. A folk set, a rock set, a pop set, and a set of originals. None of which we'd got. And we'd agreed, I think it was 50 quid and as much beer as we could drink. We decided the band at that point would be called Some Enchanted Evening. And he kind of went back to selling people drinks. And we looked at each other and said, well, we better get on with this. So we went into a rehearsal studio on the Monday and said, what the fuck are we going to do? So just started putting stuff down. Justin had a particularly nice song called Trudy, which I liked a lot. The verse of which was, no, the chorus was, Trudy, we love you. You're the best girl in the whole school. You can do things the other girls can't with your boyfriend David and your grandma. He could sing it better than me. He's got a higher register.
Oh, that was beautiful.
I let him sing that bit. I can't remember the bit that I sang. I can't even remember what words I put to it. Basically, we'd come up with stupid shit and then try and turn it into songs. One was a Roxette cover, which ended up being I strangled a dove, I bedded a cow, I slept with a daffodil and I don't know how. I strangled a dove, I bedded a cow. It's where the water blows, plucked from the pirate's nose. Which was quite fun. And the finale of the entire evening, we did the gig 2 weeks later, the two of us. I think we started out calling ourselves Tree Frog and Hawk, but decided that Some Enchanted Evening was a better name. I think I stuck to my guns on that one. It was a better name. And the evening climaxed with Justin singing Last Christmas using it was the demo song on his keyboard. So he put the demo song of his keyboard on and then screamed Last Christmas. This was I think it was June, at the audience. But the thing was that we told everybody in Lowestoft that this gig was going to be incredible. So the place was absolutely rammed. The guy sold tons of booze and he couldn't not pay us. He paid us. He called us both cunts. And then we'd drunk ourselves stupid, but he had to pay us because we'd sold so much beer for him, but he wouldn't give us a second gig. So we then decided, after Some Enchanted Evening had become a roaring success overnight, quite literally, to extend that and start a full band, which Justin insisted on being called Lung Nugget. And I'd had Some Enchanted Evening, so it was his turn. So we were called Lung Nugget. And we put his brother, Dan Hawkins, I don't know what happened to him, on drums. I think Dan was 15, possibly 16. Justin was 17, possibly 18. And I'm a bit older. I was probably about 24. And Med was probably about 22. And Lung Nugget were formed. And good times they were, good times. And I'm not quite sure what we were trying to do. Just trying to annoy people in Lowestoft, I think. I mean, that was the main reason for Lung Nugget, was just to annoy people, because the grunge scene had become very, very self-indulgent. It was very reverent. I mean, Nirvana were basically they couldn't do anything wrong at that point. It was you questioning them was a bit like questioning Donald Trump. I mean, imagine that. It was a kind of high heresy. It was a high form of heresy. So we decided to form a grunge band that took the piss out of all the other grunge bands. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. We were drunk most of the time. It was the 90s.
So if you had to list your influences for the band, what would you say were this kind of three kind of key texts or records? So what plus what plus what equals Lung Nugget?
Oh, that's a good question. What plus what equals a Lung Nugget? I think it would be, I don't think it would be bands necessarily. I think I was really into really stupid comedy. And Justin and I just shared this real love of really stupid whimsy, just making stupid shit up and then carrying it through as far to the point where people had to either laugh or leave because you had to commit or go home. It was that simple. Maybe there's a kind of Bonzo element, a Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, Vivian Stanshall element in there. I don't even know if Justin knew that stuff. He probably did. We didn't really discuss other musical influences. We just liked to make a racket. And the beautiful thing was that you just put a guitar in Justin's hands and he'd just start making a noise. You go, yeah, do that again, and then do that bit, and then do that again, and go, what can you do now? You go, I could do this. You go, yeah, do that. And then Med would make some noises on the bass to go along with it. And then we'd tell Dan what to play on the drums, and then he'd play it. He was very earnest. Dan was always very earnest. So I think, going back to your question very circuitously, Nirvana were the tits. Let's be honest. They just were head and shoulders above everything else that was going on in the early 90s. Just seemed to kind of fall beneath their spell. To some degree, and that we wanted to be bigger than Nirvana, basically. I think that's what we wanted to be, but we didn't want to have to try too hard. We never over rehearsed. We never over rehearsed anything. We just kind of did it.
Do you think that the scene at the time in Lowestoft encouraged that there were a lot of bands, and it was dead positive and really creative, and you could play places and you could follow through on the craziest of ideas because people would encourage it and support it and enjoy the joke. And for the most part, people would just be up for it. And the scene, for want of a better word, the sort of culture in the town musically, was really rich and supportive of itself.
Yes, I think that's true. I think if there was a band playing, you didn't say, "Oh, I'm not going to go and watch them. I don't like their music." You just go, "I'm going to go and see what they're doing." There was a very intense metal scene that took itself very seriously, and I remember going to I think it was the Morton Road Youth Club to watch a band who at the time, they weren't called Synaptic at the time. They were whatever John Knight's band was before that. There's a band called Synaptic now. You can look them up. They're still about. They do very technical metal, and they were playing. So literally everybody went, and it wasn't exclusively metalers. There'd be like, it was still very tribal back in the early 90s, but it was the fact that live music was happening kind of pulled all the tribes together under a kind of protective umbrella of art. So it was very supportive. If you had a problem, if a piece of kit went down, you'd have to run to a phone box and try and find someone who had a bit of kit. But people would always help each other out. You might not like what they were doing, but you respect the fact that they were getting up there and getting on with it.
So, Paul, following that kind of very auspicious start for Lung Nugget, how did the live career progress for the band? Where did it go from there?
Well, I think you're using the definition of career differently to me. I think of career as to travel downhill rapidly with very little control, which is basically what we did. We just had an awful lot of fun. There wasn't a great plan. There wasn't a we're going to be enormously famous. There was we're going to have a lot of fun, and we had as much fun rehearsing as we did performing. I mean, I think the thing is there were people such as yourself, Steve, who were taking it all very seriously, not in a po-faced way, but in a I'd like to make a career in this. And at the time, it was a time before Justin was taking himself particularly seriously. Not that he's ever taken himself massively seriously, and I had no illusions about my musical ability. I was just out there. I just like getting in front of a microphone and fucking shit up, and that was the best way. That was the best avenue to do that. At that point, was to be in a band and go and muck about with it.
Actually, that's a nice segue, mate, because music wasn't your sole creative interest, was it? And so can you talk a little bit about what your other creative interests were at the time?
Yeah. Well, I mean, music. I am and was and always will be a big music fan. I mean, it's just, and I come from a not particularly musical family. Well, my immediate family anyway. My parents didn't have a record collection. My father bought an enormous and very expensive Technic stereo, but never bought any records, which I never really understood. And he's still got it. I'm waiting for him to die so I can have it because it's worth a fortune now. It's a beautiful thing. Keep trying to get him to go to the supermarket, but he won't have it. So I was very, very, it was a case of I got in front of a microphone and it just felt like a natural place to be. It just always felt like somewhere that it just felt comfortable. It just always felt like home. I do a lot of work these days as a stage compere. So you basically just go out there with a microphone and your audience are your instrument. You play with them, and you see what wacky nonsense you can create together whilst still getting the job done. And that's what it. I think that's what it did for me. That early musical careering downhill, it gave me that. It opened that avenue. It opened the door to an avenue of possibilities. And I just like the raw immediacy of a microphone, an audience, and not knowing what the hell's going to happen. No script, no plan. And that's a bit like what it felt in Nugget. Was the boys would make some noise and me and Justin would say some things and sing some things, and somehow out of all that it would work, and it would be visceral and people would have a reaction to it. I've always maintained that there's no such thing as a bad reaction to art. If you hate it, that's as valid as loving it.
I was just say, when I was talking with Steve earlier about the sort of impending conversation with you, I'm aware that this is going to sound a little bit ridiculous, but walking around yesterday thinking about our various encounters, I had a kind of vision of you as a kind of, like a sort of town crier, like, but back in time, you've always felt to me like someone who kind of carries stories for people. And I wondered how important, given what you've just said now, about the importance of kind of narrative and storytelling for you in kind of your creativity.
Well, I think we were talking about this. I was in a Zoom meeting yesterday with some people from the Puppet Theatre in Norwich, who I've been touring with off and on. I work as a puppeteer. In moments of deep crisis, the thing that people do is gather around the fire and tell stories to each other, to pass on information, but also to communicate, to give solace, to take solace, to feel useful, to instill confidence in people, and also for people to take confidence away. So I think that narrative, this storytelling is how all of human history's been, and all of human action's been passed on. All tradition is storytelling. Everything that you've learned, you've been taught through some kind of story. A story has been told to you, or you've read a story. Even a technical manual is technically, a story in some way, shape, or form. So I think the idea of a story is very, very, very deeply ingrained in human psyche and the way humans are.
And is that an important part for you in terms of all the various, because you've gone on lots of different sort of creative tangents, does that kind of filter through most of those at some point, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a guy, he's still alive, a director who I used to work with at a place called the Seagull Theatre, and the great directing note that he used to give that I still use to this day is he'd just go, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Just tell the story. Stop acting. Just tell the story. Just tell the story." And I think most of the time, what you want people to do is just tell the story. When someone makes a piece of music that speaks to you directly, they're telling you the story. They're not waffling around the edges or trying to show you how clever they are technically. They're trying to tell you the story as directly and cleanly and effectively as they can. So it drills down right deep into you.
Your creative life has taken you on so many different adventures and all over the world, and I've always been really impressed by that. And that's still, current situation with the lockdown notwithstanding, that you've had these adventures kind of globally and continue to. And we just wanted to ask you to sort of share some of the ones that stick out in your memory, where your creativity has taken you, perhaps things that you were surprised about or situations you didn't expect to find yourself in necessarily.
There's a guy I met at a festival called the Witchwood Festival, which takes place on Cheltenham Racecourse it's in late May every year, I think. Yeah, it is late May. And they were very early adopters of a thing called the silent disco, which was invented in Holland by a guy called Nico Akers, who ended up becoming a friend of mine. And I immediately fell in love with the entire concept of a disco where everyone's wearing headphones. You're listening to two channels, so you can pick one DJ or the other DJ and dance along to, or just involve yourself in whatever nonsense they're up to. And then you can flip. You can flip between the two channels. You can dance and enjoy. And it's very social because half the audience can be dancing to one thing and you'll be dancing to, half the audience can be dancing to another thing. And sometimes you take the audience on a kind of sine wave shaped journey, but you have two sine waves running in parallel next to each other. And I met him about 3 years running at this festival. I was working as a steward there. And eventually I figured, like, I've got to get myself some of this action. This is fucking great. I want some of this. So I just endlessly have conversations with him whenever I could. And we got on. And then one year, a friend of mine, Jeff McQueen, who lectures in radio, he's a professor of radio, if that's even a thing, but it is apparently. But before that, he was a student of radio. And he asked me to help him gather a load of field recordings for a project, one of his coursework pieces, I think. And so I engineered getting myself an interview with this guy Nico at the festival. The interviews the interviews and the material gathering was all about this festival. It was like an audio documentary. So we sat in the van and I interviewed him, and we had a long, rambling conversation, rather like this one. And that was that. I signed off on it, emailed him about 6 months later and said, look, thanks very much. And if you ever need another DJ, give me a shout. And about a year later, I bumped into him at another gig, another festival somewhere, and badgered him again. He said, okay, well, we'll do something about this. And then I think it was in November of that year, I get a phone call. Hello, Paul, from Holland. And I've got the most horrific cold at this point. I've got a streaming head. It's banging. I feel dreadful. He says, if you want to come to Rotterdam this weekend, I can audition you for a job as a silent disco DJ. So thinking, well, I feel dreadful, but this opportunity is not going to come again. So I get on the Harwich to Hoek van Holland ferry and try and sleep on the ferry. The ferry crossing takes 4 hours in daylight and 8 hours at night because they go half speed because it's dark and they don't put enough headlights on ships for some reason. I'm not sure why. I think it's the environment. So I end up in Rotterdam. I get picked up from I think I just got a train into Rotterdam and then get picked up in a van and then get taken to a warehouse. Right, okay, we're going to make some radio. What? Okay, yeah, we're going to make a radio program now and it's going to go out tomorrow night and that will be your audition. It's like, okay, I've got a horrible headache. Do you know how to work this computer? Have you worked this DJ software before? No. Okay, so here's 15 minutes to learn that. Would you like some of this beer? Yes. So we just drank a load of beer and made some radio program, and then I think then we went to a party. It was one of those kind of jobs, and it all seemed to go very well. And about 4 months later, I think it was in January the next year, I get a call. Can you go to Bath and do a gig? It's your first gig. I'm like, okay. So I get a train to Bath and the gig goes okay. It was fine. And then I did another gig, I think again in Bath, and I did one somewhere else. Can't remember where, Brighton possibly. And then I get a phone call. Have you got a passport? Yes, I've got a passport. You're going to Serbia in July. I think it was July. You're going to Serbia in July. You're going to DJ this festival. This is how much money it is. Do you want to do it? But yeah, obviously. The thing was that what nobody had told me was that the guy that they were sending me with was a bona fide Dutch psychopath, complete maniac. The only person who could control him was our floor manager. There's three, so there's two DJs and a floor manager, and then a local contact as the entire team running this crazy enterprise. And I realised this was a 4-night gig. We were performing from 10 o'clock at night until 4 in the morning, 4 nights in a row. So a 6-hour DJ sets. 6-hour DJ sets. So they're quite long. I'd only been given the laptop that morning, the morning before the first show. And they gave me a laptop and they gave me a massive hard drive and a transformer plugged into the back of the van. So we're driving from Rotterdam to Serbia. And I'm loading this laptop up with all the tracks off this hard drive that I fancy, and then plugging all my own stuff in as well and trying to work it all out and learning how to use it. And then I get saddled with this complete lunatic at the other end who's mad as a bicycle. And I realised the only way I was going to keep this guy in his box was to go one more monstrously stupid than him. So I spent the first night just kind of getting the lay of the land. And on night 2, I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. It's going to be difficult to work out how to muzzle this mad rabid puppy. And then on night 3, I took all my clothes off and hung from the roof of the tent whilst doing a DJ set. And everyone went completely mad, because this is Serbia where nobody does that sort of thing. And he challenged me to do it live on the stage that night. And I just went, yeah, fuck you, I'll do it. Watch this. So I put on Iggy Pop's Lust for Life and then climbed to the roof of the tent naked and swung about like a gibbon, kind of waving at all the audience, and then climbed down again, and he never gave me any more shit again. So there's a top tip for you, listening public. If you want to get on top of people, you've got to go the extra mile. It's as simple as that.
I was going to ask you how the creative hit between your sort of current ventures and your early musical ventures differed, but actually that seems completely irrelevant now, because it's yeah.
Well, there was. I do remember one Lung Nugget gig where I did the entire show dressed in my then girlfriend's sports bra, no other top. I just had on she was quite petite. I'm not massive, but I was a reasonably sized human being. So I had this tiny little sports bra as my top, and I can't remember what I was wearing on the bottom. Probably some kind of horrible trousers I'd monstered on a sewing machine. So yeah, just go all out. There's no point in fucking about. You just got to get on with it.
This is a little kind of sidebar, because you reminded me when you were talking about the number of festivals that you've worked over the years, but you have a particular relationship with Glastonbury, don't you? And I just wondered if you could share a little bit about that and how that's changed over the years, because I know you've been in a lot of different guises.
Yeah, I mean, I'm currently grieving for Glastonbury not being on this year, which is a great disappointment to me. And I was actually, before we started this interview, if that's what you want to call it, talking to a friend of mine who runs a backstage bar at Glastonbury. Yeah, you just meet the most marvellous people. I started off as a punter I don't know, about 1990 maybe, something like that, when the world was very different. I remember it was back when you could buy a Glastonbury ticket from Andy's Records. Remember that, Steve? Andy's Records in Lowestoft. You could go in there and buy a Glastonbury ticket the week before. And then I remember one particular one where I motorcycled down. I had a 500cc Honda motorbike. And I put everything on that and rode all the way to Glastonbury, and I felt amazing. And when I parked up, the guy that arrived next to me was on a Push Maxi moped. And I had a kind of roll mat and some beer and a tent, and he had a box of wine strapped to the back of his Push Maxi. He'd come from, I think it was Bath, which is not quite as far as Bath's about, I don't know, 40 or 50 miles, and Lowestoft to Glastonbury is like 270 or something. So we drank the box of wine before we went into the festival. And then on the way in, I was walking on to the site. I had a kind of, at that point you kind of you changed your crash helmet to your motorbike. You took out the tax disc so you could prove it was your bike when you came back at the end of the festival. Put that in your wallet. And I was stomping off into the festival with my ticket in my hand, and I had this little voice behind me, and this tiny girl went, "Excuse me, could you will you take me in as your sister? Because they won't let me in on my own, but it's under 12s are free." She was literally about 4 feet tall. And I said, "How old are you?" And she said, "I'm 15. I've bunked off school. My mates have all got in, but they won't let me in. They won't believe I'm old enough." So I had to pretend. I pretended that this girl was my sister, Sandra. So I had to adopt her accent. Got her in. The moment I was inside the festival with her, she disappeared and I never saw her again. It was remarkable. You can't get away with that now. It's become a monstrous beast. I mean, the first time I worked there was 2000. We had a sit down chat, me and some kind of theatrical friends of mine, and said, "Well, we really want to go to Glastonbury, but none of us have got any money. So what should we do?" It was the year they decided as an experiment to put some walkabout acts on in the marketplaces. And they were doing just an open call. So I said, "Well, look, I've got an aeroplane drop tank in a sea lake that I can fish out and turn into a bobsleigh. Let's do that." So my friend Kaya sold that concept to them, so that I had to build this bobsleigh in my back garden out of a giant fiberglass aeroplane drop tank from the Second World War. I've still got it. It's in a container somewhere. Oh. If anyone wants to buy one, it is for sale. And then I kind of went back to being a punter for a few years, and then I got really into street theatre because you couldn't make any money as an actor. But you could make money as a street theatre performer, particularly at the early part of the 2000s, late 90s, early part of the 2000s. The street theatre industry had really kind of established itself as part of the British theatrical arts scene. And I did a few years in theatre and circus doing walkabout acts, various forms of stupidity. It was a lot of fun. And then I managed to get back into I managed to combine that with silent disco DJing with the Dutch guys, because they were doing the original silent disco in the dance village, and then they moved to the park, which was a much nicer venue because the dance village at Glastonbury is basically just headbangers, and the park is a much nicer space. So I ended up working 2 jobs. So I'd work all night DJing, and then I'd try and get up and work all day doing walkabout. And that nearly killed me about 5 years in a row. Yeah. I remember going to the doctors, going to see my GP before one Glastonbury, because I was leaving Glastonbury and immediately going to Serbia. And I knew that Glastonbury would give me a chest infection. So I got him to give me a prescription for antibiotics in advance of the fact that I had the chest infection that I told him I was going to get. And he did it. I was always amazed at that. I got that to work.
So, Paul, you've talked about a really diverse range of stuff that you've done, from the silent disco to the puppetry to the street theatre. What is it that continues to drive your creativity, and how much of it is planned? Is it sounds like it's very much a way of life for you?
I don't think any of it's been planned, Ben. I don't think any of it's been planned. I'm not sure. I don't wake up in the morning with a plan. And I think I came to the conclusion, it was a very scary thing, because I originally, I've got a background in mechanical engineering. I did, when I was in Nugget, I was working as a forklift engineer, fixing forklift trucks. And before that, I'd been a motor mechanic. And after that, I was a diesel engineer mostly on ships. Lowestoft, if you don't know, is a port. It's also to the most easterly point in Britain. So I took a kind of giant sideways leap. And I remember exactly when it was. It was 1997. It was just after the new Labour government were elected. And it felt like, I was 29 years old, and it felt like, look, if I didn't do something at this point, and change direction and just start trying to be happy, then I was not going to have a nice life, because I was really not enjoying engineering at all. It was driving me fucking bananas. It's just no fun. There's no fun working for idiots in dangerous occupations. It's no fun at all. So I decided to work for idiots in non-dangerous occupations, and that's much more fun. But I've always worked on the principle, but it's a kind of really scary, potentially scary thing, that kind of leaving job security. Remember that used to be a thing, didn't it? In the 20th century, job security. People would talk about job security. That nobody ever talks about job security anymore because it's no longer a thing. You mention job security to people these days, and they look at you like you've talked about a goat airport. Job security I just gave it up. I just decided it was shit or bust. It was shit or bust time. A friend I was working with in amateur theatre offered me a touring job in professional theatre. So I took it. And then I just vowed I was never going back. And I haven't been forced to yet. So, that's one in the eye for everybody else and one for me.
Well, you're built for it, aren't you? And I think that goes back to what you were saying before about standing on a stage, holding a microphone and feeling like this is somewhere where I feel like the best version of me and where I feel most at home. And that's always been the case. You don't need a microphone on a stage. That's to my mind. Much like Ben was saying before, you are that town.
You're just that's because we've got 2 yogurt pots and a very long string between my house and yours that cross the country. That little guy in the Pennines with a stick and a hook in it, holding it up in the air for us.
Well, we're heading towards the end of our list of questions, but one of the questions one of the things that we're sort of trying to do with these podcasts is exploring the bands a little bit. So what happened to the rest of Lung Nugget?
Med, the last time I saw him, he was working in a bookshop in Lowestoft. I haven't seen him for a while, and I'm not sure what's happened to him. And Justin and Daniel Hawkins, well, I mean, who knows what happened to them? They followed their own musical path, and they really sold out and became successful and famous. And they never phone. They never phone me. I mean, the phone's turned on, boys, if you're listening. I know Justin did live in Lowestoft for a while. It was I used to bump into him in Tesco's, and we'd talk about moustaches and butter and cats. He was obsessed with cats for a while.
There was never any talk of reforming Lung Nugget then?
I mean, never say never. I mean, there's no reunion shows in the pipeline. I think they're too busy with the darkness. But I mean, never say never. Never say never. I mean, the songs are strong enough. I think they hold together. I think "Leaves on the Line" is as pertinent now as it ever was. And I am still genuinely gutted. I'm still genuinely gutted that I don't have a recording of Ken's "On My Mind" and "He's on My Shoulder Too," which I really do wish I had, because it was a song about a guy I worked for who was an absolute solid gold cunt. In fact, I knew my friend Andrew is married to a woman who was his renal nurse. When he had his kidneys failed, they're going to give him a kidney transplant, but all the kidneys they tried rejected him. He was just too unpleasant. Yeah, no, they became very famous and did lots. And the most amusing bit is that the original lineup of The Darkness included my cousin Ed on the drums. So it all went round in a weird circle.
So, Paul, at that time when that was when that sort of the rise of The Darkness to that kind of stadium level success, there was a lot of I know for us that knew them, there was a big sense of joy for them, but there was also a little bit, certainly from me or about kind of feeling a bit envious and about wanting to having those experiences, with all its excess and verve and that. Did that trouble you at all?
No, it didn't actually. I did get phoned up by a guy from a tabloid trying to get information, but I really confused him. So he'd only heard of Empire, which was a band that Justin was in. He'd never even heard of Lung Nugget. When I dropped Lung Nugget on him, I thought he was going to shit himself. But I wouldn't give him any more leads. So I gave him the tantalising idea of a band that he'd not heard of. Justin and Dan were in, but never gave him any more information. So he probably furiously smashed his head against a wall for hours trying to get around that conundrum. No, I mean my cousin Ed, is rock and roll excess personified. It was like a proper episode of Spinal Tap, but he was always extremely generous, and he still is. He's quite a down to earth fella. He's just never had a proper job, so he doesn't really understand the world at all. It's just quite entertaining. I do love you, Ed, if you're listening.
Just thinking about your creativity and it's the directions that it's taken you off into, and all the places that you've been, but you've always remained rooted to Lowestoft, and I've always found that really it makes sense. But could you talk a little bit about that? And like,
I think if you want to spend your time oscillating wildly around like a maniac, trying to enjoy yourself and also spread some fun, you need a wheel that will only spin around a central point. You need a base, you need an axis, you need a hideout. I quite often describe Lowestoft as a hideout because you just come back here and people just treat you like it sounds incredibly arrogant, like a normal person. Yeah, because you are just a normal person. But you just go out and hang out with your mate who's works on the dock or runs a pub or whatever. Yeah, I think in order to go to the moon, you need to establish a really good base at NASA to fire your rocket from. And if you're not firing your rocket from a stable point, it's never going to hit its target accurately. It's like your happy place, I bought this house a very long while ago, and it is a shithole. But at the same time, I kind of love it because it just serves my needs perfectly. It's like houses are machines for living in, and it's just the right size to just keep me afloat.
Paul, thank you so much. Thank you so much, mate, for doing this, being on the podcast and sharing some of your memories. Can we just close out with you introducing the song that people are going to hear now?
Well, the song you're going to hear now is the song that we rehearsed the most because we enjoyed doing it so much. And it was always the song that we enjoyed performing live the most. It just always brought stupid amounts of joy to our tiny minds because it was so much fun. And that song is Satan's in My Phone Box. Open brackets, let's give him a ring, close brackets.
Thanks, mate.
Songs from a Padded Envelope is presented, produced and edited by Steve Swindon and Ben Clay. Music is by state-sponsored Jukebox. Artwork is by Matt Canning. Songs from a Padded Envelope is a Hidden Hive production.